This podcast is sponsored by developmentaid.org, your gateway to international tenders, grants, and the largest job database in the aid sector. Secure free registration and access funding opportunities, calls for partners, exclusive insights, and weekly news digest. Become a member today to achieve your sustainable development goals.
Hello everyone and welcome to Development Aid Dialogues. I'm your host, Hisham Alam. On February 27, 2026, we celebrate you, the NGOs making a difference every day. In honor of World NGO Day, Development Aid is offering a special 1+1 offer. Secure one membership and get full platform access for 2 organizations. This means you and your partner NGO will have full access to largest database of grants, tenders, jobs, and calls for partners. Visit developmentaid.org to double your impact today. As we mark International NGO Day, we are shifting the lens to how international NGOs can genuinely empower grassroots movements and communities on the front lines on crisis and change. We will explore how organizations balance rapid emergency response with long-term transformation and what it really takes to stay relevant amid shrinking civic space, funding pressure, and protracted crises. I'm very pleased to be joined by Linda Nordby, a humanitarian expert from Norway and the head of the humanitarian division at Norwegian Church Aid. She holds a master's in international relations from the London School of Economics and has led crisis response in Ethiopia, Myanmar, Palestine, Liberia, South Sudan, and the Philippines, which is giving her a rare perspective on how NGOs connect local realities with global responsibilities. Linda, it's a pleasure to have you on Development Aid Dialogues, and thank you for joining me to reflect on International NGO Day.
Thank you for having me, Hisham.
Linda, to start with the big picture, from your vantage point at Norwegian Church Aid, how do you see the distinctive role of international NGOs today, especially when it comes to empowering grassroots actors and movements for a more just and sustainable future?
I think from Norwegian Church Aid's point of view, working together with local communities and local civil society is part of our DNA. So this is basically the way we've been working since the start. What I do see now in the changing context of our sector is that this kind of work is even more important. We need to be able to work alongside national actors in order to address the vulnerabilities and the needs in fragile contexts.
You mentioned in our earlier exchanges that sometimes feel people at the head offices are a bit removed from the day-to-day dilemmas colleagues face in the field. Can you take us into a recent moment, a visit, a conversation, or a kind of decision where something from the ground really challenged or reshaped how you think about your job in Oslo?
I think all visits to the field are sort of enlightening in the sense that knowing exactly what faces our colleagues when they work is something that we don't encounter every day at a head office level. It could be everything from bureaucratic impediments that we don't really understand here, thus putting unreasonable pressure on our colleagues in the field. It could be the safety and security situation for our staff. And it could also be the mere social dynamics in certain communities that we work that we do not quite understand when we are not in country.
But how do you handle it?
There needs to be, of course, close collaboration between the country offices that we have and here at head office, dialogues. There also needs to be visits from head office to country offices to better get a good grasp of what's actually going on. But there are also a lot of conversations going on some of these big topics at the global level as well.
You know, what I'm asking about this, because for me as a journalist as well, on my personal level, when I was getting training or lectures or studying with partners from Europe and they are advising me and my colleagues, you have to do this, you have the right to do this. But when we tell them that the situation on the ground is completely different, something that you feel it should be done by default, we struggle in Africa or in the Middle East to have it done. And it is a challenge, and it needs courage to do something that you can do in your normal life, in Norway, for example. I totally understand that the challenges that the frontline workers in the Middle East and the Asia and Africa is completely different from the perspectives that you see in Europe, right?
Yes, I agree. And also, this is important, of course, when we set up our systems and our procedures and our guidelines from head office to take this into account. So we are trying, to the best of our ability at least, to include and incorporate input from our field offices and our country offices.
Staying with those frontline realities for a moment, let's zoom out across some of the places you have worked. You have led responses in places as different as Ethiopia, Myanmar, South Sudan, and the Philippines. When you look back across those crises, is there a pattern in how communities themselves organize and respond? And how an NGO like NCA can either strengthen or unintentionally weaken that local energy?
I think as a general observation, I would say that people living in these harsh and fragile contexts are quite resilient. How they respond, I have experienced, depends a little bit from context to context. But in general, I would say there is a lot of community support and collaboration. And as an NGO, this is also what we're trying to tap into through working with local organizations and local communities, is to strengthen that already existing network or structure so that becomes stronger and also more resilient when a crisis hits.
You've hinted at the tension between responding fast and thinking long-term. So let's dig into that a bit more. I would like to discuss the balance between emergency and long-term work. In your own division, how do you decide when to stay in firefighting mode and when to invest in approaches that build resilience and dignity over years, not months?
I think as a dual mandated organization, Norwegian Church Aid is really well placed to do both at the same time. So we are lucky in the sense that we have long-term development money and also humanitarian funding in many of our protracted crises where we work and the fragile context where we work. So that kind of flexibility gives us the opportunity to both build some resilient structures, like I spoke about before, together with communities or with civil society organizations, and also strengthen the civil society organizations and our partners to be able to do humanitarian response when need spike. So I feel that for us, we can do both at the same time. And it is important now, I think, in this changing world, that we are able to do both at the same time and be able to address both underlying vulnerabilities, but also then immediate needs when that's called for.
That makes a lot of sense. My next question is about Sudan, which is one context where NCA has tried to bring humanitarian and development work together for what you call compounded effects. Without going into operational sensitivities, what feels genuinely new or different about that approach? And what are you learning from it so far?
I think it is something that we have done to some extent before, but given the decrease in funding and very difficult context on the ground in Sudan, we have found that working more strategically around certain areas with different types of funding sources has been more useful. And to think in a way that we are able to set up a response where we can also exit because in the end, humanitarian aid is a little bit of a band-aid. And what we need to think about is that we want to leave behind a more resilient community than what was there before we arrived. So I think, just as an example, what we're looking at is not only addressing the needs of IDPs, but also looking at what host communities need, looking at markets, looking at small-scale farmers, trying to create some sort of system where we can provide the IDPs with cash and then small-scale farmers with some agricultural inputs, and then also making sure that they have access to the market so that the local community can sustain itself.
I have a question in mind that I used to ask recently to all my guests. During the international aid cut, have you faced any situations that you have to abandon or to skip some areas or topics that you feel it's a matter of interest?
We're still in that process of seeing what we are unable to do with the aid cut. For us, it's also been, we've seen this trend coming, and we've seen that 14 of the 20 OECD DAC countries have reduced their aid in 2025, not just the US, and it's slowly been pointing in that direction. And Norway and a few others are still having modest increases, but in general, funding is going down. There's nothing in particular that we are, like a huge part of our work that we are abandoning at the moment, but there are small things, of course, that we have to stop doing. And we're also, of course, looking at improving our efficiency. I don't think we'll be able to compensate for all the funding cuts by improving efficiency.
Interesting, thank you. The World NGO Day this year focuses on empowering grassroots movements. From your perspective, what does empowerment actually look like in a place facing active conflict or severe restrictions, beyond the language we use in the strategies and proposals?
I think it means that we need to have a proper partnership. It is hard because there is a power imbalance with funding, etc. But establishing trust between grassroots movements or local organizations in our instance, for the most part, is key. Of course, that takes time. So that has an impact sometimes on our ability to be a very fast and timely responder, especially when we're entering into new partnerships. But as NCA, we do have a lot of long-standing partnerships with a lot of trust, a lot of church-based communities with huge networks. And with them, it's to a large extent about making sure that they are operating within the framework that they need to operate, and also to build their capacity when it comes to everything from more operational things, but also more organizational things.
That is a helpful way to frame it. And this is my next question. It's about localization, which has been on the agenda for years, but funding and decision-making still sit largely with international actors. Where do you see real progress on localization in NCA's work? And where do you feel most frustrated with how slow the system is to change?
Yeah, this is true. We've had this conversation for several years. I think for us, it is about engaging and also shifting the decision-making to our partners. So this can happen more at a country level, where we do partner consultations and make sure that they are basically designing the responses that we have, of course, with input from the beneficiaries. But at a more organizational level, what we are doing is doing thorough consultations in the regions with our partners from different countries on our partnership policy and on the way we work. And we're doing getting feedback from our partners annually on how we're doing on basically being a partner and trying to improve. So I think that's giving them the voice and also adjusting according to their inputs is a way of giving them some impact on the way that we as an international organization work. I think the frustration with, I guess the big issue is to some extent, at least what we discussed here in the organization is how to overcome some issues with shifting the power to more so to local actors is, will we pass the audits of our donors, basically? And as long as the audit requirements are what they are, it will be hard for quite a few of our partners to work on their own, stand on their own, and take that role that we're encouraging them to take. So I think that we need to look at what kind of requirements we are putting on the local actors.
Very candid. Thank you. And the context is only getting tougher. Access, security, and the shrinking humanitarian space are major concerns in many of the contexts where you have worked. How are these pressures changing the way NCA plans its response and shares risks with national partners and local staff?
Yeah, a broad question. So with regards to access, there is the security and safety impediments. There are bureaucratic impediments. And all of these, we try to work together with our partners to overcome. I think what we are trying to do to a large extent in order to help our partners operate on the ground is to be as flexible as we can. So say there are access issues in one area, we will try to discuss and find ways to implement a response in a different area. So having that constant dialogue, trying to find solutions, I think is one of the ways that we're trying to enable our partners to operate in these challenging environments.
Linda, that's an important point. Norwegian Church Aid is a faith-based organization with deep church and community networks. In practice, how does that identity help you reach people and build trust in crisis? And are there situations where it also creates dilemmas you have to navigate carefully?
Maybe to the last thing first, I think, yes, of course, having church in our name can be challenging in certain contexts. So we find ways to overcome that in those cases. And there is also the fact that we do have had a long history in many countries. So we are often fairly well known. I think working with churches means that we're working with structures and individuals that has a lot of trust and outreach in communities. And that is something that we have actually benefited from in certain situations, whether that's about negotiating access or if it's about sort of getting a large volunteer network up and running. These kinds of things we have benefited from. What I see we get a huge benefit from when it comes to church and faith leaders in general, because we also work with other faith-based actors, is advocacy work that we do. And also working on norms change and also issues on more like behavioral change. Then I feel that having faith-based partners and faith-based sort of background is a real asset.
Thanks for unpacking that. Linda, if you look at the broader humanitarian sector, what is one habit or way of working you think international NGOs really need to leave behind? And what should replace it if we are serious about accountability and affected people?
I think we are working very siloed. When you go places that everything connects to everything, right? So in a way, it's also sometimes limiting us by being so siloed, like development, humanitarian, different sort of sectors. So I'm hoping that we will manage somehow to look at things from a more holistic perspective, addressing issues in a community or in a certain geographic area from several angles, and trying in that way to create those compounded effects that we spoke about in the beginning.
That is a strong challenge to all of us. For colleagues in smaller or national NGOs who may feel overshadowed by international players, what practical advice would you offer on how to engage with organizations like NCA as equal partners rather than just implementers?
Yeah, I think it's important that local, smaller NGOs challenge international NGOs Most of us have signed up to different types of charters or are committed to partnering with local organizations in a way that does not make them service providers, but actually entering into a proper partnership where they have an equal standing with the international NGOs. It is, of course, difficult because of the power balance, and you probably, as a national NGO, would like to receive funding from the international NGOs. But I think it is important to stand your ground and point out the duties that we have as international NGOs towards the national NGOs.
Very practical. To close on a message to the front lines, on this International NGO Day, what message would you like to share with frontline staff and partners in places like Myanmar, Palestine, or South Sudan, who are holding services and communities together under extremely difficult conditions?
I will just like to express my admiration and gratefulness for the work that they're doing, given the fact that most of them are IDPs or affected themselves and living through the humanitarian crisis that they are responding to. And I would also say that we are keeping in mind from the head office level the challenges that you are facing, and that we are constantly trying to improve our way of working so that we can make your life easier.
Linda, thank you for joining Development Aid Dialogues and for sharing both your field experience and your reflections from leading Norwegian Church AIDS humanitarian work. For our listeners, International NGO Day is a reminder that real lasting change depends not only on global institutions, but also on NGOs and community-based organizations that stand closest to people's everyday struggles and hopes. If you found this conversation valuable, please follow and subscribe to Development Aid Dialogues on your favorite podcast platform, and share the episodes with colleagues and partners interested in humanitarian action and the future of NGOs. I'm Hisham Alam, signing off. Thank you for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye.